NewsMax president and CEO Christopher Ruddy was recently on television, and he made an interesting case. Now, we've got his face here and it says biased news, but I'm not referring to him. Even though he's conservative, I actually think, I as a progressive think that he makes an interesting case. They're going to be talking about fake news, and he brings up the issue of biased news. So let's watch.
We talked about fake news earlier on your show, or folks have, and that's been the talk of all the news media. What about biased news? I think that had a much bigger impact in this election. And there's a general feeling, Jeffrey Toobin said earlier, people feel the media are responsible. You guys had a responsibility to give fair and balanced news. And I think anybody that looked at this objectively, they were talking about issues the American public didn't call.
So that's very interesting. And I think I generally agree with him. So the question is, what was more damaging, fake news or biased news? Now, this is where I will lose a lot of Democratic Party establishment. And I know that generally, and I know it specifically because of the quotes that I'm going to give you. Huffington posted a big story, and they lean progressive, about, this issue of, blaming the media is outrageous. Just bow your head and accept what the corporate media gives you. The corporate media couldn't possibly be biased. So I'm in a unique situation here because some of the conservatives say, fake news is not a real issue. Democratic Party establishment thinks fake news was the determinative issue, and if it wasn't for that, we would have won if it wasn't for you rascally kids. And don't blame Hillary Clinton, don't blame the Democratic Party establishment, it was all the fake news. No, I think fake news was a real issue. I saw it on Facebook, and it was in droves. And obviously it had a purpose, and it was to deceive people, and I think that it did have an effect. But I don't think it was determinative. I don't think that it absolves the Democratic Party of the issues that cost them this election. I also agree with Ruddy that it was not the biggest factor in news. So now let me give you the so-called liberal position, and then I will argue against it. So Thomas Mann, who is from the Brookings Institution, which is a left-leaning think tank, says a lot more goes into policymaking and decisions than money, and the idea that it's all bought and sold is really quite destructive. Now, he's saying that in the context of the media because he's saying all these guys on the right who were talking about draining the swamp, and all the people on the left, like Bernie Sanders, who were saying that the politicians are bought and the corporate media is part of that same establishment, are wrong because, it's really overbought, overstated. Come on. Do the politicians really listen to their donors? Yes, Thomas Mann, they most absolutely do, and I've got evidence to show you in a second that is, I think, very much determinative on that issue. And then he goes on to say, there's too much reporting that reinforces the public view that it's all corrupt. What do you mean there's too much reporting? There is almost no reporting in the mainstream media about how it's corrupt. They will carry a speech by Trump when he says drain the swamp. They will sometimes carry speech of Bernie Sanders, or when he's in a debate, they will allow him to make the point. They won't cut his mic as he says that there's corruption. But when's the last time you saw the corporate media talking about politician X gets money from these donors, and then he does exactly what his donors tell him to do? Here, I can show it to you in the legislation. Now, they could do dozens. In fact, they could do hundreds of those stories. But do they? They almost never do those stories. So, Thomas Mann, I don't know what the hell you're talking about when you say that the media covers that too much. No, the problem is they don't cover it nearly enough because, remember, they are the benefactors of that corruption. Most of the money that is raised from donors goes into TV ads. Billions of dollars in TV ads. They're not against that corruption. That corruption is their business model. So more from Mann, more that is wrong from the left side. To Brookings Mann, that could be the Sanders campaign's lasting legacy, Huffington Post explains, convincing an entire cohort of first-time Democratic-leaning voters that the system is beyond repair. And here's a quote directly from Mann. He says, that was referring to Bernie Sanders, that was Sanders' major contribution to this election, unfortunately. I thought Bernie was very harmful. So if you had all just bowed your heads and accepted the establishment as it is and not challenged it from the left, we could have just tricked the American people for longer that there was no corruption, that the donors don't make any difference at all. Okay. Donna Brazil, unsurprisingly, agrees. She said the leaked emails from Podesta were, quote, weaponized to sow misinformation and to sow discord between the Clinton and Sanders camps. Now, look, those emails, yes, they did not help Hillary Clinton's cause, but that's because they revealed the truth about what she was actually thinking and what her campaign was actually doing. The Clinton-Sanders camp were divided based on policy, based on real differences. It wasn't like, oh my God, the Russians hacked something and created a divide. No, that divide already existed because the Sanders camp, real progressives, say there is corruption. It's obvious, right? And the Clinton camp goes, no, I don't see any evil. I don't hear any evil. There's no corruption. The establishment is awesome. Vote for the establishment. How did that strategy work out for you guys? It worked out miserably because the American people don't agree with you. And by the way, very importantly, they are right. So now let me show you the evidence on that. So this is the chart of productivity versus hourly compensation through the decades of America. So you see in that chart from 1948 to 1973, and I would make the case that change happened a little bit later, but it's, some people call it 78, some people call it 80, and here in this chart they say 1973. Okay, and you can see with your own eyes where it begins to diverge. But from 48 to 73, inarguably, as American productivity went up, hourly compensation went up, which is great. So you, the American worker, you were productive and you got compensated for it. But from then on, that chart diverges significantly. Great job, American workers. Your productivity was through the roof. It was up 74.4% from 1973 to 2013. And overall up 243%. God, you're incredibly productive. But your compensation did not match. Between 1973 and 2013, your hourly compensation went up only 9.2%. You did not get the reward of your work. You see the difference between those two lines? You know what that equals? Trillions of dollars. Not millions, not billions, trillions of dollars. Now, so what happened there? What happened was the system got rigged in favor of the rich and the powerful. And they did it through changing the tax code. They did it through keeping the minimum wage down. They did it through deregulation. And how were they able to get those laws passed? Why weren't they able to get them passed between 1948 and 1973? And why were they able to get them passed after the 1970s? I'm glad you asked. Well, back then we had the New Deal in place. And it did not allow for direct campaign donations from multinational corporations or from wealthy individuals directly into financing elections. That was illegal. You couldn't do it. So it was really hard to buy your representatives. That's not to say that it never happened. Of course, there's been corruption throughout American history, but it was harder, and if you got caught, you went to jail. And you can see from that chart that it was so hard that they couldn't rig the rules to take all the money away from you back then. You see the proof is in the pudding. It's in the results. But then when they changed the rules and the Supreme Court in 1976 said money's speech. In 1978, they said, oh, corporations are human beings, and so they have a First Amendment right to pay off politicians. They legalized bribery. And when they did, you know what the result was? All of a sudden, your representatives no longer represented you, they represented the donors. So let me show you the result of that. So this is a Princeton and Northwestern study, and they showed over a great number of years, this is over 1,800 policy positions in about a 40-year time period. And the chart on the left shows you the results of public opinion. Did public opinion have any effect on public policy? Now, in a democracy, it should have a direct effect. The people think this, they get laws that say the same thing. But on the left, you see it's a flat line. So your opinion, even though we're supposed to live in a democracy, had no effect on public policy, on the laws that were passed, none. On the right-hand side, you see economic elite and donor opinion. That has almost a direct correlation to the laws that were passed. That's how they rigged the system. It's not a conspiracy that's hidden anywhere. It's right out in the open. They said, oh, I got a great idea. Let us just bribe them legally. The Supreme Court, stacked by right-wingers, and Nixon is the one who stacked it. Lewis Powell wrote a memo saying, hey, why doesn't the Chamber of Commerce just capture the Supreme Court? It'll make all the difference. Richard Nixon reads the memo, and that was written in the early 1970s, goes, hey, Lewis Powell, that's a genius idea. Guess what? I'm going to put you on the Supreme Court. Not I'm going to take your idea and put someone else in. He's like, that's such a good idea. I'm going to let you capture the Supreme Court. Lewis Powell goes on the Supreme Court. What does he decide? He's the deciding vote in that decision, Buckley v. Vallejo in 76 that I told you about, deciding vote in Bellotti, the 1978 decision. The business interests capture our Supreme Court, and then they're able to legally give money to politicians, and all of a sudden the politicians don't represent you anymore. So I showed you the results of that. Trillions of dollars of value extracted from your work goes into their pockets. But on top of that, let me show you how they fixed the tax code. Back in 1952, when we have an honest system, corporations are paying 32.1% of all taxes. The social insurance and retirement is only 9.7%. That's the payroll tax that you pay. Everybody pays it, and it's a regressive tax. It actually, once you get beyond a certain income level, the rich don't have to pay it anymore. They pay it in the beginning like you do, but on top of their extra income, they never have to pay it. It's actually the least fair tax that we have. Now look at 2015. All of a sudden, corporations are not paying 32%. They're only paying 10.8% of the taxes. Look at that magic. All of a sudden, their tax burden is much, much smaller. And by the way, that is not corporate America. That is multinational corporations. Their executives are multinational. Their shareholders are multinational. They have no interest in America. They're not patriotic. They are robots and machines built to maximize profit. Those are multinational corporations that rig the rules in our country to their favor. And look at who winds up paying the price. That social insurance and retirement went from 9.7 to 33.5% of all the taxes being paid. The most regressive tax we have, the one that charges the biggest percentage of income to the poor and the middle class, especially the middle class, well, that's where the tax burden got shifted. And then the last trick of this is that as you are mad that taxes are too high, you're right, because they shifted tax burden onto you. Then the Republicans turn around and go, you see that? That's why we should lower taxes on corporations. You see how they switched it on you? You're not wrong to be mad about taxes because you're carrying the bigger load. But lowering corporate taxes doesn't help that equation. It hurts that equation. So all of this is in service of the establishment. That is, yes, the corrupted politicians. That's true. So Democratic Party, you could argue that the Republican Party is slightly more corrupt than you because they're better at serving the rich and multinational corporations, then that's fair. But it's only slightly better than you. Are you guilty of this as well? Hell yes, you are. That's why the people just didn't vote for you, because Hillary Clinton was the embodiment of the establishment. 17% of Donald Trump voters said they thought he was unqualified for office. Isn't that amazing? Unqualified for office, but I voted for him anyway. Why? Because I can't stand the establishment. That's who Hillary Clinton is, and I'm not going to vote for them, okay? Now, on top of that, the establishment is also the corruptors. So Republicans, wake up. How do you think the politicians got corrupted in the first place? From their donors. So multinational corporations and all of the other interests, whether it's rich people, including Sheldon Adelson and the Koch brothers and the Mercers who are on the right, or George Soros, Mike Bloomberg, whoever else is on the left, corporations and unions. We've got to stop them from buying our politicians. So they are the establishment. And part of that establishment is, yes, the media, because the media is also run by multinational corporations that are worth billions of dollars, that profit to the tune of billions of dollars from the ads that go into that corrupt system. We've got, and so when you say from the Brookings Institute, from the left or from the right, oh, everything's fine. I don't know what people are talking about being the system being rigged. That's what we're talking about. The system is rigged, and there it is in clear evidence as to how it got rigged and what the results of that rigging was. Look, you asked me, I want you to fight back against that system in any way you can. I don't care if you fight from the right, you fight from the left, you fight from the middle, okay? Now, and however you think is the proper way to fight it. I think the proper way to fight it is to get an amendment so that we don't rely on private financing. If private financing, you know what it leads to? People working for the private financiers. So if somebody signs your checks, I got news for you, and all Americans outside of Washington and New York already know this. You work for the guy who signs your checks. So if he tells you to do something, you're going to do it, otherwise you don't get the checks, and then you can't win the election. So you got to get that money out. I believe you need public financing. If we sign their checks, they work for us. So now you have different ideas for election reform. God bless your heart. Let's go do a convention, an Article 5 convention, to get us amendments to do election reform. Because one thing the entire country, over 90% of the country agrees on is we need election reform. This system is fixed, and it's not fixed to help the average American. So go to wolf-pac.com/revolution. Go there, help them get more members, help them rise up. You know that Wolfpack already has 35,000 volunteers on the ground across the country. They've already passed legislation in 5 states. If you get 34 states to call for a convention, and the establishment will hate it. They'll say, no, that's too much change. Don't change it. Don't change it. Yeah, of course you don't want it to change because you're profiting off of it. But for the rest of us, we need that change. We desperately need that change. Wolf-pac.com. If you want to be a volunteer, great. Be part of the solution. Be part of bringing our democracy back. If you want to donate so that we can hire more people to get this done, great. But we need amendments to fix the system. We got to go above the Supreme Court. So they capture the Supreme Court. Well, the only thing above the Supreme Court is the United States Constitution. And our founding fathers said that we must amend the Constitution, that they were revolutionaries and they built revolution into the document. The revolution is an amendment. Wolf-pac.com. Fight in any way you can. If you think Wolfpack's not the right answer, fight in that way. If you think public financing is not the right answer, that's okay. Join Wolfpack anyway, because we're going to do election reform, and we're going to discuss all the different ideas on how to reform our elections. But come and do something. Stand up. Don't listen to the liberals. Don't listen to the conservatives who tell you to bow your head and that there's nothing wrong with the system. You know in your heart there's something wrong with the system, and I just showed you exactly what it is. So stand up and come and fight back with us. Wolf-pac.com. Let's go take on the corporate media. Come join us, be a member, and change the media. tytnetwork.com/join.